All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for showing up today to learn a little bit more about some grant basics. We're happy that you're here today. Just some housekeeping items before we get things kicked off. If everyone could go ahead and mute yourself if you're not speaking for the moment. And of course, unmute if you have any questions or use the raise hand function. And we will also be having a Q&A slide near the end. So if there are questions that you have that you'd like to ask the whole group, while we go through this presentation, be sure to be thinking about those and we'll have those addressed at a portion of this presentation. Also, one more thing, if you'd like to put your name and your organization and how many years experience you have in grants, if that might be months in grants, that's also an acceptable answer because we're all learning here. But happy to have you guys, and we're excited to kick things off today. Okay, so just kind of an agenda overview of what we'll be discussing today. We'll go over some grant readiness, go over the NOFO or the Notice of Funding Opportunity, and how to prepare for grants. And we're going to break that up in further detail as we get along. In order to do this, we have kind of a fun analogy we're going to be going with. We're going to be looking at this process as making pasta or making some sort of recipe. You'll start with some preparation. So you'll gather your ingredients. You'll want to set aside all of your tools. And then once it's time, you'll want to really prepare to the best of your ability all these ingredients as they come together. And then also, once these opportunities come up again, you'll have that understanding of how to approach it the next time these inevitably come around. So we'll be referring back to our little pasta analogy as we go along. And I'm going to kick it off to April to begin on the grant readiness section of this.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So we're just really going to look through some basics today. And one of the first things we want to start with is, grant readiness. And we know that we've talked about grant readiness before, but I think that we really need to dig in and look at what that really means. And so, the questions to ask yourself are, have you guys or your organization ever managed a federal grant or a state grant or even a local grant? And do you feel like you're ready to, take the next step or apply for another grant? Because sometimes, getting multiple grants in all at the same time, while on paper it looks good, but then when it comes to actually doing them, it can get very stressful very quick. The next thing is your organization registered with sam.gov and is it active? You have to go back in on sam.gov and reactivate it every 2 years. So you'll want to make sure that that remains active. That one allows you to, they ask that number, when you apply for grants. It also allows you to bid on federal contracts. And then kind of along those same lines, it is, do you have an EIN or your federal tax ID number, whatever that may look like, depending on where you're at. The other thing, and I do this every morning, I have a list of grants that I'm tracking and a list of grant sites that I'm tracking them on. And so I go to, every morning, I go to the governor's grant website to see if anything is posted. I go to grants.gov. And although on a lot of those you can sign up for their email, for to be on their email list, I like to see it for myself, and I want to know, early in the morning if that's something that we need to get ready for. So you just want to make sure that your grant readiness day or week or month, wherever you're at. I guess if you do it on a month, you probably be too late for a lot of grants. But if you do it, daily or weekly and just check it out, then you know that you're on top of all the opportunities that have posted or that they're showing that will post soon. And then the other question that we ask is, do you have matching funds, or does the grant even need matching funds? And that's one of those that we forget to talk about sometimes until you get excited about writing the grant. And then, you continue to read and you see where you have to have matching funds. And sometimes that can kind of take the wind out of your sails. But we're going to talk a little bit here in a little bit about what does matching funds even look like. So we want to talk today too about organizational capacity, and that comes in a lot of different forms. And when you look at the honest answer of what can our organization do, can we write the grant, or do we need to have somebody help us write the grant? Can we do our own award management? Can we handle, doing what they say they need to do? Can we do our own internal tracking and reporting? Or do we need to ask somebody else to assist us? Or do we need to find a contractor? Or, is that something that the hub can help you do or learn how to do? Um, like I said earlier, the grants look great on paper. And we've even had this discussion in Topeka. Allie and I both, we got a $6 million grant. And then literally 3 weeks later, we were informed that we had received a 40 or a $20 million raise grant. And it came back to back. And everybody was excited, but Allie and I were excited, but in shock because we kept thinking, oh gosh, we have to make sure that we have everything in place to handle these two large grants the way that, the grant was asking for. So and we continue to do it. Like, what else needs to be in place? What else do we have to be able to do internally so that we can make sure that when we're writing the grant or actually, you know, doing what they said we need to do in the grants, that we have everything in place to be able to do that. And then the last thing is audit and record keeping. And that looks different really for everybody in every organization. We have a 5 year where we have to keep all of our files and we have to keep all of our records. We know that we have a yearly audit for the entire city that our grants are part of, and we have to have everything in order to make sure that we're prepared to answer those questions about how did you handle this grant, or what things did you do.
Something to touch on that I know everybody's probably really excited to talk about is compliance and monitoring. So a lot of the heavy lift on the back end that isn't the fun stuff, as someone from Public Works, we like putting stuff in the ground, and this is not that, but it is also very necessary in order to do that type of thing. The 2 CFR 200 is something that you should be very mindful of. The folks in the chat who have had the experience of working in grants for a number of years understand that this is a very fluid thing to keep an eye on. This changes, and to be aware of any changes that occur and to make sure that's reflected in all opportunities that you'll be pursuing related to procurement, management, personnel, any workforce requirements. That's going to be your tried and true document to make sure you're in compliance with. You'll want to make sure you have no unresolved audit findings. That's kind of part and parcel with managing government service in general. Just being aware if there are any issues within the past 5 years, to be mindful of those and make sure those are addressed. The third thing is kind of more of a nice to have than a have to have in terms of grants. And we at the City of Topeka, we've been working through creating a grants policy that's been really helpful to help not only set the standards for how to route things internally, but to help create more efficient processes. And so that folks are more aware of how these things get processed and what approvals you'll need. A lot of the time we'll need city manager approval or signature even on grants, and that can be a real fork in the road between whether or not you go for a grant if that you build in that wait time of all those formal approvals that are necessary to be able to do things correctly. Measurements or measures to separate grant funds. It's very important not to supplant. And what that means is you have accounted for, I'll use the capital improvement plan as an example. I think hopefully we can all kind of relate to that. Um, if we have set aside something in our capital improvement plan to fund a specific project, we cannot use grant money to go ahead and take care of that funding. What we can do instead is use that project number in the capital improvement plan as a supplement. And that's really important that we can differentiate the fact that we see that as a matching fund and not a supplanted fund, so that we are able to stay compliant with federal requirements, and that's also, with the state requirements and other entities. Performance tracking and reporting, that's another example of a mandatory item that the federal government will require, and they'll want to see documentation on, and to make sure that if those are things that you need to consider outsourcing some of that reporting, to think about that early on, because once it comes down the pike, it's now on the municipality to decide how to monitor those sorts of things. And then lastly, strong monitoring systems, just making sure you're following the dollar the entire way, and understanding that anything you do in one grant will impact you in another grant opportunity. And that isn't just, us in public works, it's also reflecting in other departments for the city of Topeka. So anytime that we go out for a grant in planning or housing or police department, they're all impacted by our ability to monitor our own projects. So we're all one team, and it's important to keep that in mind as well.
And they ask about that, right, Allie? Like when we apply, they'll ask, have you had any negative audit findings? Or, is there any money that you owe the government back? And whether that's from your department or somebody else's department, that matters and you have to answer truthfully.
Absolutely. And so definitely don't shy away from those difficult answers to those questions if indeed there have been moments like that. Definitely not irredeemable, but it's something you want to draw attention to, because you never want to lie and get yourself
Mhm.
in a deeper hole that way. So sticking to our analogy of cooking and making pasta, um, the notice of funding opportunity we're going to be talking about, but this is a piece of the puzzle that we're creating this. We've got all of our ingredients, we've got our tools, and now we're ready to get chefing on our meal here. So we're gonna talk about, once we've done all that initial planning, what's the next steps.
So, in the grant world, there's only about 5,000 different acronyms that we use, but NOFO is probably the one that we use more than any of them. And it's a notice of funding opportunity. These are what comes out on grants.gov or um, on Just Grants or wherever you're looking at the time. But they are your who, what, when, where, and why of everything that a grant writer does. They will tell you exactly how much money is available. They will tell you exactly, well, I maybe not exactly, they'll give you a scope of what you can use the money for. They will definitely tell you when it's due. And one of the caveats to that is, so a lot of times now they're asking you to maybe register on grants.gov, but put it in under another system. So right now it's what, smart grants that you can look under. And so some of them, like a FEMA grant, we had to put in one system and then made sure that we had to upload it into the FEMA system. So I would just be very read that part of the NOFO very thoroughly, and then it will tell you when it's due, and it'll give you, every piece of information that you need to know about applying for this grant. We got into a conversation in our pre-meeting about, what that looks like and what you do with your NOFOs. And I print mine out and I go through and highlight mine and write on mine like who needs to do things or what I need to do, who I need to talk to. I sticky note it, and by the time that that grant's written and put to bed, I have a whole novel of what my NOFO looks like because there's just so much information to keep together. Allie, you want to kind of tell them how you do it?
Yeah, so I definitely still print, highlight, and all that more on the traditional side, but I also like the ability to use, and I'm sorry if I'm speaking over people or under people, but um, hitting Control F and being able to search through the document by keyword, that's my favorite thing. Because if I think about, oh, I know the phrase I'm looking for, where in the document is it? And even just looking up like 2025, and I can see each instance of sometimes due dates that are within the document. Um, just things like that. That's how I like to handle those.
Yeah, so everybody's different. You kind of just have to find what works for you. And, sometimes you'll find a piece of the NOFO that is just extra paper or, extra verbiage that you maybe have read 100 times with all the other grants, and it's no action items that need to be done on that. So you can kind of cross that page out so that you don't have to keep referencing or going back to that page to make sure you have everything accomplished.
Yeah, consolidation is key when it comes to any double digit document, in my opinion.
Well, the last one I think I did was like 85 pages, and so when you have to start lugging that around and then everything, your paper clips and sticky notes and stuff, it kind of it becomes a lot.
They're valuable in these trying times. So just to talk about again with the NOFO, you'll become pretty familiar with the format depending on if you're kind of in your own agency. So like USDOT, for example, once you've seen a couple of them, they kind of seem familiar. They tend to have the same information in them. They might just be different in what they're asking for. So as April touched on, just some key elements of the NOFO eligibility. So what type of entities can apply. Sometimes this can be very specific to maybe a rural community. And then it's important to understand, what does rural mean? Because rural can mean something in one grant, can mean something in a different one. Funding amount and project scope, as we talked about, there can be some um, understanding what match requirements there might be, what's eligible in terms of, is this construction, is this planning, are there opportunities or prerequisites for applying for this grant, deadlines, requirements, the purpose. A lot of these grants, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a later slide, but they tend to be aligned with certain objectives. So it's really important to be looking at some of the merit criteria and the purpose of these grants, because that's really what they're trying to get to. And we'll talk about it, but they're in these buckets of deliverables, and you're really trying to weave in those types of categories that they've called out. And that's another great thing about using control find in the NOFO. You can see like certain keywords that are important to this agency. And of course, the deadlines and the process, what you can expect in terms of hearing back from the agency. One thing I'll mention here as well is it's kind of nice to be able to take your calendar, your Outlook calendar, or your physical calendar, and just backtrack deadlines. So by the time you get the NOFO and it's in your hands, and then the deadline date, and kind of reverse track, okay, this is when I need to have this into them a week in advance. That's preferable, but you want to try and program those approvals in backwards. And so when you need to go out for letters of intent or letters of support, then you're able to kind of do that in a strategic way. So it's not just like you're overwhelmed by it, but working backwards definitely helps. All right, so talking a little bit more about eligibility. So NOFOs will tell you exactly who's eligible. Most of these grants are open to municipalities. Sometimes they're called political subdivisions of the state. Do not let that confuse you because that's confused me before. Because, like, why don't you just say cities? So they're also available to nonprofits and tribal governments at times, schools, universities, research institutions. Some grants are specifically only eligible for schools, universities, and research institutions if they're research based. That's important because sometimes as a city, you can look at something and think this would be a great opportunity for asset management or something, and it's very particular to a specific group. And then often, I don't see this in my line of work necessarily, but businesses can also have opportunities to apply to grants as, contractors and that sort of thing. So just be mindful that it is in the NOFO, and if you're ever confused about it, definitely ask and look it up, and don't feel shy about asking directly to the federal agency that is producing the grant, that they're expecting those types of questions.
So on the NOFO, you're going to see usually on the first page right hand side, but it'll tell you what's the total funding that's available. And then beside it, you'll see like a ceiling and a floor. So if your project is less than, let's say the floor is $1 million, you know that that's not the grant for you. But you also know if you need to apply for a $20 million grant and your ceiling on the NOFO is 5 million, you know you need to keep looking as well. So those are things that I always tend to look at first because I want to know, if we're even in that realm of the same finance. One of the other things that's really good to look at, I know a lot of people will bring me a grant and say, hey, we should apply for this. It's like $20 million. And then if you look at it, they only award like one grant for the whole $20 million. And so if we were ready to be extremely competitive in the grant, and we knew that we met every single criteria and that, 100%, 99%, we were the person for that grant, but I have to kind of explain to people, let's look for grants maybe that are smaller, but they have more of an outreach, where it may be a $5 million grant, but they give that out to 120 different people or 120 different agencies. So you kind of have to be realistic when you're looking at the NOFOs so that what you're getting yourself into, and if it's something that's realistic or that you have a good chance of being competitive and getting. So deadlines and submission requirements, I kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. But so in Topeka, when I started, I guess, we had this, it was kind of a free for all, unfortunately, and everybody just applied for grants in their own department, and we didn't really have someone that could sign it or someone that needed to sign it. And so we would get these questions back about these grants that we received or maybe we've written. And Allie and I would look at each other like, I didn't write this. Did you write this? And we would have no idea what's going on. And that, that made us uncomfortable because we didn't know what we were signing up to take money to do. And so we started part of our new policy manual is a letter of intent. And what this does is it makes sure that everybody that needs to be in the know is in the know. So if Allie just wrote one last week, but basically she would write it to her supervisor and myself and saying, hey, this grant came out, we have this idea, this is what it consists of, this is what we would like to do, and this, if there's a match or not a match. And so she would send it to us, and then I forward it to our business CEO and our legal department, and then our city manager. And our city manager has like the ultimate yes, go for it on the letter of intent. And and then our CFO can ask financial questions, and our legal can kind of look into it and say, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more. There may be some more legal implications that we have to address or we need to look at. We do this before we even start writing the grant or even meeting about it, really, because if legal comes back and says no way, there's a big issue with this, then we don't want to have spent a week writing it already just to have to trash it because we didn't get the appropriate approvals on it. So that letter of intent has really helped us kind of stay better in the know, and to make sure, our city manager, when he goes out into the public and people will say like, oh, I know you guys applied for this grant, how's it going? And he has zero knowledge of what they're talking about. That doesn't always look great. And so this way he at least can read through it and be knowledgeable about, what we want to apply for, and what that's going to cost the city as far as any match money or anything like that. So just make sure that you have those procedures in place so that everybody's knowledgeable. We got into a situation where somebody didn't apply or didn't send in their letter of intent, and we had two applications from the city from two different departments, and we didn't have any discussion about how we could use that organizational wide. And I would be mortified, I guess, if the federal government called and said, hey, this is great, you have two grant applications, but we only need one, so which one do you want to pick? So we just really try to make sure that we ask a lot of questions before we even start writing this grant, so that we're all on the same page as an agency.
So circling back to what we talked about briefly about purpose, these are some of the buckets that are pretty familiar in the territory of a NOFO that an agency would like to see addressed in particular applications. And I think it's very important to look at these holistically in terms, I think I'm going to speak out both sides of my mouth really quickly and say, um, take these into consideration for your projects and be thoughtful if maybe these aren't addressed through your project. But on the flip side, think creatively about how we can maybe look into certain outcomes related to the project. So it's not as black and white as you might think. Um, Economic growth, I think, is a good example of that. That means a lot of things. So really be creative with how you address economic growth, because you might think, well, we're just repairing something, or we're just trying to do an addition to, let's say, a building. Well, if you're if you're promoting folks to come visit the building or to make it a manageable experience for, let's say you have a utility billing building that needs redone, then you could make a justification for economic growth because you're making it less of a barrier for your residents to go ahead and pay for their services to be in your city. It can look a number of different ways, but I think it's the most important part, because each of these elements are going to be used within a matrix to score your application. So it's better to try your best in justifying it than to write nothing because you can't quite get there. but use that information wisely because there might be a better project that has a better fit with a lot of these goals that they're trying to address.
Well, and Allie, when we put our safe streets, when we started looking at that, like what, a year and a half ago, and in it they said um, all these big words, and then it really came down to they wouldn't allow us to build anything permanent, but we were able to get grant money to um, put a sign in the ground with cement because that's not permanent. And so the goal isn't always necessarily as the goal may be clear, but the steps, that they will accept aren't always lined out like you think it should. We really in our meetings we went from do we need to buy chalk for kids to draw on sidewalks, clear over to the other realm of wait a minute, we can buy all of the new, striping and signs for all new crosswalks across the city of Topeka in the school zones. So, we only learned that though after we asked a ton of questions. So, it's going to be a journey sometimes of when you know what the goal is, but your purpose may change 5 different times before you actually get there.
I think you nailed it, April. Ask questions. Never be afraid to ask a question. There's no such thing as a stupid question because, as we all know, things change all the time. So just, you know, don't be shy about it.
Match requirements always become kind of an interesting conversation to have because it looks like so many different things depending on what the grant allows you to use. So a lot of times we will have to do a match from funds that we have in our general funds that are earmarked for specific projects. And not to kind of get into the supplanting issue again, but we have to make sure that this money isn't actually in our budget or budgeted. It just has to be in our general funds, and that's maybe what we were thinking about using it for. And so we know that, some of our grants, we've had to have a ton of money to match. And we have had to be, honest and say, yeah, we just don't have that match right now. But now we know what the match may be for next year. So let's table this conversation until the NOFO comes out. And let's spend this next year trying to figure out and get money to where we will have the match. And then that way, the next year it's not a big surprise all over again. So sometimes it's okay to say we just don't have that match right now, and then table it for a year, or maybe it's just not a good grant for you to even apply for. Um, in kind is always one that I know in especially like small cities, small towns, that they always will say like we can't come up with a match. We don't have all that extra money. And so I will have them look, and if it says in kind can look like so many different things. It can look like a meeting room. If you were to have to rent that meeting room, would it be $200? Well, then you can put that down as an in-kind donation or an in-kind for your matching money. Do you have a clerk that is going to spend 10 hours setting up a meeting and a block party or whatever that's specific to that grant, a grant kickoff? You can use that staff's time to help with that match and to look at the in kind. So again, I grants on paper are very like this is what you have to do and this is what you will do, but you kind of have to become a master of reading between the lines and knowing what is acceptable and what's not acceptable for every part of it. And then making sure that you can fulfill that when when the time comes.
So going back a little bit to how to map this out, how to kind of reverse the scheduling of all this. This is a lot right here on this screen, but it's critical to be able to be organized about it because it becomes a lot more like the elephant bite analogy, just little teeny tiny steps at a time, and you'll get to the point where you feel confident in submitting your application. There are some keys to this. That don't necessarily change, but you just want to be mindful of, like I said, addressing the NOFO every opportunity. That's every annual cycle or however often these opportunities come out. In terms of formatting, typically it's Times New Roman 12, but err on the side of caution. I have heard, this is my own, I guess, nitpick, but some people will say, oh, well, you need to make it look attractive and everything. I'm boring, or I'd rather be boring and be in compliance with what the grantor says than, use our century Gothic bold and make it look pretty. So if they say specific formatting, I follow that, and I like Canva, I like Adobe and all that. So that's just coming from someone with that type of mind, but follow their instructions that way. Like April had mentioned earlier, be sure you understand like what your UEI number is, and that can be found in your sam.gov certification stuff. Be aware of any mapping requirements or different data sources that are available to you. Those can be reused. Census Bureau has great tools. I know that USDOT has great tools as well. If there's ever any population questions that you want to have answered through some of their data visualization, be sure to have your community involvement and engagement done as best as you can. I know that can be a bit tricky on certain projects because it might be very conceptual and you're looking for a planning grant, but be sure to know who those key stakeholders are early on so that I'll tell on myself a little bit here. I had a grant opportunity that I had about a week to turn around, and that's not where I like to be. That was not a comfortable situation, but I did have a list of folks that I knew that I could rely on if I get them a template support letter that they can reword to fit their organization and their priorities, that they got my back on this because they're aware of the project. There were a lot of pre-work that had to be done in order for that to happen, but don't let it stop you. Basically, like, even if you're held up against time, just try and see what you can pull together for that type of thing. That kind of goes into sponsorships. If you ever find that you have a private public partnership, or um, we talk about potentially collaborating on projects, we've had something with Washburn University doing cost shares and stuff like that, making sure that you have memorandums of understanding ahead of time so that once you do get the grant, then you're not stuck having to reverse track and be like, remember when you said you promised that you'd bring us this money for reimbursement? Make sure you have that before you start all this process. And lastly, submission methods. We talked about this in our pre-meeting, but it can happen. Sometimes it's not a digital submission. Um, I remember back not too long ago, you'd have some grants you'd physically print off and you would have to have like a flash drive. Sometimes you do that with bids, like it happens. So just be sure, like, do I need 3 triplicate copies of my grant to produce for this state opportunity? I think we're away from that, but just make sure that you understand and be ahead of schedule on knowing how to submit.
Ali, you want to talk a minute about the kind of things that you ask, like when you send out like sponsorship or support asks, like what are those for?
Yeah, so particular to transportation, making sure that we have stakeholders that are in like transit, the county, MPOs, stuff like that, metropolitan planning organizations. Uh, we want to make sure that we're connecting with them on if there are master plans that we're working on that they're in collaboration with, that they can speak to their part of it. So if it's within their jurisdiction, or even if it's close to their jurisdiction or it makes sense on a transit route, if it has to do with some of their populations that they serve, trying to make that connection for them. And I've found it to be really effective to kind of meet them halfway there on it. So sometimes, especially when you have folks that they have a lot on their plate, they might not understand the idiosyncrasies of what this grant does or what it's intended to do. Just kind of bullet line out, this is to address this infrastructure for this need, and then they can kind of weave in, these are our strategic goals, and just trying to bring it as low barrier as you can, I think, is the approach to that. Okay, so moving on to another very common table in a NOFO are just kind of a navigation checklist, call it what you want, but this helps you kind of be able to, if you're a physical person, you can strike out the things that you've addressed in your application. One thing I like to do is take exactly the wording out of the NOFO. So if it's project description, if it's funding commitment documentation, write out exactly what that is in the title of each of your submissions. So like in your application, so that you can track that, okay, I've addressed this, I've addressed that, and be sure that it helps keep you on track and aware of all these parts and pieces, so that when you're finally assembling all of it, that you had your eggs, your flour, your baking soda, like all of that is all addressed because you're keeping track of that in your recipe card.
So, in the NOFO, they will talk to you or they'll show you what their merit rating looks like. And, you can read through this, but I think the thing that we want you to know more than anything is while it would be great if you had 6 or more of the 8 merit criteria, and you are, 100% perfect on everything that they're asking for, that's fantastic. But in reality, none of us could be, have in place all of those things that they're wanting 100%. And I guess if we are, then we know it's exactly the right grant for us. But a lot of times they will say, this is recommended or this is highly recommended. And I usually acceptable and unacceptable. I just cross those off because if we're writing a grant and we're writing things that are unacceptable or just acceptable, we probably should reconsider what we're doing because there's going to be a lot of competitive grants put in that maybe they meet 2 or 3 of the recommended um, aspects, or they meet 4 or 5 of the highly recommended things that they want you to do or that they want you to be able to do. So I'm not saying don't write if you're in the acceptable layer, but try to have more of the highly recommended and the recommended than acceptable. And sometimes there are things in grants that may be something recommended, and it's just nothing you have the capacity to do anything about. Um, it would be like the city writing a grant that was 100% to do with the school system in Topeka, but we don't have anything to do with the school system in Topeka. It just doesn't make sense. And we're never going to meet those merit ratings because we're writing for something, that's completely different. Now, if they said that they wanted us to partner with one of the school systems and we reached out and became partners with them, then we could look at the grant more seriously because then we could meet more of the highly recommended merit criteria or even the recommended criteria. So I guess all in all in this, just make sure that what you are able to do and that you are wanting to do will fit in these scoring categories.
kind of going back over some of the requirements post award, you'll get kicked off with the grant agreement, and that will truly be your commitment to seeing this grant through to the end of its life cycle. And what does that look like in action? Submitting progress reports, making sure that you're showing the activities related to each of the grant components, and that you're able to track the performance and the being able to show what you put in for the grant is being held to it, the standard that you set in your application, and just making sure that the deliverables that the purpose of the grant stated is being reflected in the work that you're doing. Being sure to also track the money, as we mentioned before, and complying with the audits and oversight that are required of these grants as well. So these are all continuous, like I said, through the life cycle of the grant, and that will also influence future grant opportunities in the event that something doesn't go well, potentially, hopefully not, but just to be mindful of, these aren't isolated projects, but this is truly the reflection of your entire organization. And sometimes I would reckon even the state, judging on how the federal government kind of, weighs out some of these investments. So moving on to our next section in our pasta making analogy. So we've just made pasta and we're thinking, wow, that was such a fun experience. If anybody had the sourdough experience during COVID, that kind of kicked off this whole, hey, that was fun, let's do it a million other times. So now we're thinking about making pasta even more. How are we going to do that? We're going to prepare for the next round of funding. So we'll kick this back to April to talk about what that looks like.
But I'm not gonna I necessarily talk about this. We will send this out in the slides, because we talked about a lot of these things in the different sessions that we've had. Um, the big things is to make sure that you're grant ready, and whatever grant ready looks like to you or your organization, or whoever you're working with on these grant strategies, that whatever it looks like for you, are you ready? Are you able to do this if a NOFO came out tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? Or would you have to scramble and try and get everything, lined out or figured out? Do you have all of this stuff done, so that you can confidently just start writing? And that's probably one of the worst parts, is being so excited to be able to write, but you don't have the infrastructure that you need, and the support and the backing. So you just have to make sure that you're ready. And especially now, we used to be able to track when grants were coming out. They came out every February for HUD, but right now HUD's saying no, they're not going to come out until May. So you just have to absolutely be ready for whenever they decide to post them or whenever they decide to put them out. So Jason put this over in the chats too, to get all the slides out of this. Before we move on to any other things, are there any other comments, questions? We'll go ahead and open it up for anybody to go ahead. The other thing maybe we would ask you is, like, when you have time, if you want to type a message and tell us anything else that you might like to learn about in upcoming sessions, or always shoot us a message or whatever. But we are very open to doing our research into things that you want to find out more about.
So while people are kind of contemplating, we can start talking about resources that the Hub offers to all of us, and we're very thankful for that. They're a great resource for us. We're definitely well, I'll claim myself, I'm far from an expert. So I will kick it off to Kenda to talk a little bit more about some opportunities outside of this webinar.
Thank you. So, one of the things that we want to talk about is, what does your outreach look like? How do you grow your network and your resources? The Infrastructure Hub is here to help Kansas try and receive more federal funding from the government. And we are trying to help meet need through project readiness and grant readiness, and then helping you work through that entire scope of work and through that process. So that can be from pre-award all the way through post-award. There are a number of training opportunities and events, and we're hoping that you share this information with those in your organization. We know that everyone is not meant to do everything, and some of our smaller partners and colleagues certainly wear multiple hats. So it's important that you share this information with others that might be involved as part of the process so that they are too informed about the process and that they can help you along the way. Next slide. So what can you do? You can phone a friend. We're here. I'm a technical assistant. I am actually in the no EDD region, which means that we do not have an economic development council. It makes things a little bit more difficult for our area, but all of our colleagues are here across the state, and you can see us all right there. That if you click on the links, it takes you immediately to our email addresses, and we're here. We're here to help. We can educate. We can provide information about what grant opportunities are open or what opportunities could be open, and we can provide project readiness. If you're wanting to know just how should I start, if you've been through some of these trainings and you're like, I feel like this is a lot of information. Absolutely. We're here to help walk you through it step by step. Next slide. This is a great representation of how the regions are divided up across the state. And the reason why we've divided the regions up this way is because sometimes you can work in concert with your economic development partners, but you can also then work within partnerships within your communities and or collaboration within those communities. So our technical assistance has been divided up so we can help, make connections, help people resource develop, and really help make the most impact in those communities. Next slide. And you can help grow your peer connections. April and Allie really had this idea of kind of growing these webinars and really trying to share some information. And that's kind of what kickstarted this whole webinar series. And I think that's an amazing opportunity in resource development. They are also available. They've, would welcome your input and feedback and are happy to help answer any questions. And then we have also provided all of the information for the regional planning councils here. And they too are also a wonderful resource, and the other technical assistants that we presented earlier do work in concert with these regional planning councils. So great resources all the way around. Next slide. And I'm
Great.
going to pass it off to Jason, and he's going to tell you about some other good resources coming up.
All right, Kenda, thank you. I just wanted to call out Kenda for her organization and helping make this series happen and behind the scenes and her design expertise. She already thanked Adley in April, and we've done that in past months, but wanted to thank Kenda for her help with this as well. But my name is Jason Fazell. I'm with the Kansas Infrastructure Hub. I'm one of the 3 staff based here in Topeka. And we've been getting out around the state a lot, going to a lot of conferences. We were at the Kansas Rural Water Association last week with 2,500 other participants, but realized that we're not going to touch everyone that way and wanted to make ourselves available for some open office hours online. So here's an opportunity to join us next Monday. I'll put a link in the chat for registration for that. It's going to be an online webinar just like this one, and you're welcome to join us to talk about just about anything. I'm going to try to do 2 things at once while I talk. One of the Other things we're going to be talking about, I'm sure at that, is the recent release of the Safe Streets and Roads for All NOFO. This just came out. It's going to be due, let me get it in front of me, June 26th. It's for planning and demonstration grants as well as implementation grants for those that have a safety action plan in place. Quite a bit of money available for this. It's does require 20% cost match requirement, but because it's funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law, you can apply for Build Kansas funds to help with that match. Next slide, please. And then our next opportunity is our 2025 Kansas Infrastructure Summit to be held in beautiful Lindsborg, Kansas, Little Sweden, USA, just south of Salina. We'll have a great agenda planned for the day. It's just a one day. We've got partnership lightning round with our partners at Office of Rural Prosperity, K-State University Technical Assistance for Brownfields Program, K-State 105, and the Office of Registered Apprenticeships. We also have a lunch presentation by Glenn Grimshaw with the National Governors Association. He's going to talk about what's happening at the federal level and have a lot of insight there from Glenn. And then finally, our state agency partners, Office of Information Technology Services, Kansas Department of Transportation, Office of Broadband Development, Kansas Water Office, Kansas Department of Environmental Management, and KDH, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, will be presenting about grant opportunities that they have available. So it'll be a great day. Registration's free, lunch is provided. We just ask that you register, if at all possible, by April 9th so we can get our lunch numbers in. Next slide, please. And then finally, oh, Allie, can you, it's not, there we go. And with that, just remind everyone that this is a once a month webinar series that we're undertaking. And again, you know, it was Allie and April's baby. They came to us with the idea and they've really run with it. So thank them for doing that. We're scheduled for next May 7th, Wednesday from noon to 1. The best way to learn about these and find out about them and sign up is through our Hub newsletter. And I know we opened it up for questions earlier and didn't have any takers right away. But with that, we've got a couple minutes left. I will open it back up in case anybody has any questions or comments. All right. Well, thank you all. Have a good rest of your day and week, and we'll see you next month, if not before. Thank you.